That was good. Pity about poor Catherine, though. Tick-tock, 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 tick-tock.
Your anagrams are showing, Doctor. Lewis' friend. Iron sulfide, also known as fool's gold.
Oh, Clarice, your problem is you need to get more fun out of life.
You were telling me the truth back in Baltimore, sir. Please continue now.
Well, I've read the case files, have you? Everything you need to find him is right there in those pages.
And tell me how.
First, principles, Clarice. Simplicity. Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature? What does he do, this man you seek?
He kills women.
No, that is incidental. What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve by killing?
Anger. Social acceptance and sexual frustrations.
No, he covets. That is his nature. And how do we begin to covet, Clarice? Do we seek out things to covet? Make an effort to answer now.
No. We just...
No, we begin by coveting what we see every day. Don't you feel eyes moving over your body, Clarice? And don't your eyes seek out the things you want?
Greetings, and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I am Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Alchemy Journal. Hi guys. I want to thank everyone for the awesome success that the first alchemy class was, and especially thank Dan for giving us such an awesome opportunity to have a great spot to learn. It's really, really great. We are having another class this Sunday, so, and as I had mentioned before, there are still a couple seats left, so by all means give Dan a call if you're interested and see if there's any room, or drop by the Druid's Knook in Downtown Olympia and see if there isn't any room. There's also always some fluctuation, so if I receive, let's say, notice from one of the class members who can't make it one week, then we can always contact the overflow list. Alright, so you're probably wondering, why start off with the Silence of the Lambs as a startup piece to set the tone? The reason for it is it's an answer, in part, to a question that's been popping up repeatedly since the first class, and actually a little bit before that one. I kind of came forward and I said, hey, guess what? I'm actually a practicing alchemist and I understand this stuff and I'm willing to share it with people. And of course, since there aren't very many alchemists out there, at least none that publicly say that they're alchemists, I get asked frequently, you know, so what's the deal? How did you get started? Is there like a Hogwarts for alchemy out there? You know? Can I set up a school? Which of course begs the question, I should be probably setting up Hogwarts for alchemy. That's what these classes are. Consider it your personal Hogwarts. But no, actually, my process started in college with professors who would challenge me. I had two specific professors as part of my ecclesiastical background training. And when I would go over a sacred text, they would always ask me, what's the implication? And the other would say, so what? And you know, so it immediately forces you to peel back yet another few layers. And they would constantly apply themselves to me that way. So every time I would decrypt something, they would then say, and? So? And the point of it is I was like Agent Starling going to Hannibal Lecter and saying, help me figure this myth out, help me figure out this archetype, help me deconstruct this doctrine. And they would look back and they would say, well, what does this mythological person do? And I would say, well, they throw lightning bolts and they're in command of the... No, that's incidental. That's just part of the show. It's like Batman. What does Batman do? Let's apply this to him. It's a great example. What does Batman do? What does the Joker do? How exactly do they exhibit what they are? I mean, Batman himself does that whole quote of, you know...
Wait. You could die. At least tell me your name.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
Bruce?
And, you know, it's a judge me not by what people say or whatever, but what I'm doing, right? He's going back to that whole principle of it's what you do. So I began to apply that. And when I recognized that through every culture you could apply that technique, and then you could see a common thread of consciousness, because there are multiple cultures referring to the same kind of guy, throwing around lightning bolts, or managing the heavens, or acting as a mediator, or rising and setting, or causing chaos and destruction. Each of these mythological archetypes keep popping up, and so that was a component. That was a component. And then that kind of sat there in the back burner for a long time, that understanding. And as I progressed and my eyes kind of opened up, I went through that process that I think almost everyone goes through when they wake up. You get, you know, you call it what you want. Most people like to refer to it as conspiracy theorists. I prefer conspiracy analysts, because typically I wouldn't theorize about anything, but I would analyze the prevailing theories and try to see exactly what was going on. And I would utilize a lot of the same techniques, the decrypting and deciphering techniques of looking at the same ones I would apply to a various archetype. I could then draw from my higher education and apply it to aspects of macroeconomics, and then look at that within the politosphere and see where that was going. And ultimately I came to a point where it literally, it was a huge bell ringer one day. I was just sitting there meditating on all this stuff that I had learned, and I realized I had been looking at it completely wrong. And the image of the hanged man kind of pops in my mind for a moment, and I realized, oh wow, it doesn't matter. And this is for everybody out there. This is the best advice you will ever get when trying to decipher or decrypt whatever it is that you're looking at, whether it's a music video or a movie, or if you're reading a book or watching a play, looking at a statue. It doesn't matter what you think it is. It doesn't matter. It's absolutely irrelevant, whatever it is that you think it is. So if you're looking at it and you're trying to call out some organization and say they're worshiping some demon or devil, that's what you think it is. And that doesn't matter. What matters is what they think it is and what they think they're doing. So you have to adopt kind of a profiler aspect where you put yourself into the shoes of the person, and I did. I started really carefully looking at what the people who are actually giving us our culture are doing, how they conduct themselves, what exactly do they say, and perhaps even more importantly, I drew a page directly out of Scripture, which was, "By their fruits you shall know them." So I looked at what they were producing. I looked specifically at their art, all kinds of art, because that's my background, and I analyzed it relative to my knowledge of art history and classical archetypes and classical mythological structures from the Mediterranean and Egypt, which is also part of the Mediterranean. But people sometimes forget, they always think just Rome and Greece, but actually Egypt's a component of that, as is, you can't really count Babylon, but you can throw it in there if you want. I digress. So I started looking at that, and I saw that their art forms were actually duplicating all of these older things. And it wasn't enough to just go, wow, okay, there's a lot of imitation. And it's certainly, for all of you guys out there that are satisfying yourselves with Illuminati speculation and looking at whatever cabal that you're trying to figure out, and when you see a singular eyeball and you're like, it's the Eye of Horus, right? It might be the Wadjet Eye for all you know, or the Eye of Re, which is the Wadjet Eye. But you would have to understand really that what they're doing is displaying a specific form of consciousness relative to our present state, and that's actually what they're doing. And you would have to understand the underpinning of consciousness relative to that state in order to understand what its effect is. There's so much more to all of this than any of you probably even have imagined. And I'm not talking about some kind of conspiracy here. I'm talking about looking at the beauty of a tapestry that is so finely woven over so many millennia. It makes you wonder, is the weaving of this tapestry a fully conscious act? Or is some of the weaving of this tapestry some kind of consciousness bleed over? A means by which we're telling ourselves this story, these very important points that help us understand the complexities of the chaos and the ordered systems wherein we find ourselves living. So, I included that Hannibal Lecter quote because I wanted you to start thinking, and as part of that process, recognizing what is your process of thinking. The other day I was hanging out with Dan, and it was awesome because, it happens to me all the time. You just lose your track of thought. I dare you to try to think that thought again, right? I dare you to try to just grasp that thing that's on the tip of your tongue. Exercise your free will for me, please. There's an entire dialogue that could be asserted right there, just on consciousness alone and its flow or ebb, as it were. So, this is part of it. Now, if you want to check out, I have a secondary YouTube channel that I pay attention to occasionally. I'm focusing entirely on this because my focus is this. Nothing but positive, guys. Nothing but positive. I want light out there. I want it to be something wherein fear can be dispelled and idolatry can be dispensed with, so that you can have a more immediate connection with whatever it is that you're seeking. And trust me, there's multifold application. This is like fine-tuning any well-operating system, if you happen to have a good computer or something, or a good car. This is the understanding that certain parts are better. They perform the same function, but they might work more efficiently. Different spark plugs or different gaskets, whatever. Different processing unit. It's still going to process, but sometimes, it will function less encumbered by a certain prejudice. And that definitely is another thing that needs to be dispensed with if you are to be a good analyst and a good alchemist. Because alchemy requires analysis. All of the stuff, getting back on track to the question, so how did I get started? In order to figure out what some of these people were doing, especially understanding Kabbalah and understanding its presentation within everything, I began to actually do what I have written and called leading a life deliberate. Wait for the book, it's coming. Anyway, trademark. And what I would do is I would actually structure what I was wearing like I would if I was a costume designer for a play or a movie. And I would consider the presentation of myself as upon the tree, so that I could then focus my consciousness actively and passively towards generating certain ideas, or perhaps being open to generating certain ideas, perhaps being more open to creative aspects. So I began to pattern myself and my behavior in such a way so that I could actually understand it. Sort of like getting into Rome, and when in Rome you live like a Roman, right? And that way then you could really appreciate the food, as it were. What sort of nutrient and nutriments that were being dispensed to your mind. I found it extraordinarily enlightening, and it also allowed me to look upon those who have framed our society wherein we live with a much higher degree, I suppose, of respect just for what's all being managed, and appreciation for what has been retained, and a degree of frustration for a high degree of frustration for the fact that this knowledge should be shared. People should know who they are. We should know what we are and what we're capable of, so that we can take credit for our achievements, so that we can draw more things to ourselves, and that includes wealth and prosperity of all kinds. Not merely to the mundane of drawing money to you. Drawing a wealth of knowledge, opening up the capacity of your mind so that everything comes at will. It's just like turning on the faucet. So as I started exercising and trying to understand what they believed they were doing, I understood now what I was doing, and realized that there was value in it. Recognized that there was value in understanding Kabbalistic archetypes relative to alchemical precepts, right? And I understood, and all of this, of course, was after the fact. In fact, leading up to this, I had been studying, it's kind of funny, actually. I had been heavily invested in Egyptology, and I had been working my way through the Egyptian pantheon and understanding that, and working my way through understanding hieroglyphic text and writing, and recognizing that a lot of what we see in presentation of what is considered pictographic could also be considered hieroglyphic relative to the positionality of the characters involved. You don't read about this because, I don't know, maybe people just don't think like I do. But as I've mentioned in the past, my gift is to be able to see connections and patterns between what other people might consider disparate systems. So I'd been working with Egyptology for a long time, and I'd been working with all of the classical magical texts and trying to basically synthesize those, and then working my way through Kabbalah with an understanding of the practical application of the tarot. And over time, astrology, of course, figured into this, and with that came palmistry and numerology. Each of these fields I had been studying independent of each other, until one day I realized, holy crap, this is all the same thing. Like all of this, it's all part of the same system, but like the Manhattan Project, where you have a bunch of scientists break everything up into separate pieces and no one really knows what they're doing, this was exactly what had been going on with this esoteric doctrine. That all of these sciences, which ordinarily are treated separately, as if they're not necessarily connected, and any overlap is generally just kind of brushed over. The truth was, it's all descriptive of the same exact stuff. And then when I realized that the people who were creating art, and art being defined as anything in literature or sculpture or art, right? Art, music, that these people were using this stuff as their toolbox to construct things, to represent conscious states, so that there was a kind of shorthand going on in everything. And when you recognize that shorthand, when you recognize what the artist in question, whether it's a director, a film director, or someone who's directing even a music video per se, or someone who's writing a book, like the 13th Warrior, and you see that this person is clearly identifying astrotheological concepts, 13th Warrior, and that each of the characters are embodying some aspect of that greater whole, that greater theology, that greater understanding, which then renders itself as a teaching instrument, because all of this then is viewed subjectively in order to understand it. You have to take a look at it subjectively, which was like the last and final piece. And that last and final piece for me was just recognizing that you have to step in the mirror. You can't just look at the mirror or look at the object that you're at, the painting, the sculpture, the photograph, the commercial on television, the book you're reading, the scripture that you might be reading. And you must also enter into it. You must recognize it on a subjective level, which is why so many of these greater concepts, so many of these greater celestial objects, principles, and attributes of a universal nature are anthropomorphized for our benefit, so that when we see a celestial interaction between certain bodies, we recognize that interaction on a more real level. So, for instance, when you see all of the stars in heaven and the planets all engaged in their business at night, and then when the sun breaks, from a given perspective, this is the rising of a particular God who now is exerting his force and his will upon all systems, both near and far. And why? Because perhaps jealousy, right? I'm it. I'm the only thing out there. It's one of those astrotheological concepts that then gets brought out into various literature. As I mentioned, the 13th Warrior, where the blonde guy, who's the king, who goes up there, he's obviously the sun, and then the 12 dudes around him represent the zodiac. Antonio Banderas obviously is a stand-in for Capricorn, right? And although he is picked as Aquarius, I suppose, if you count all through, but really with anyway, I digress. So, but, oh goodness, it's so rich out there, and I found myself a bit overwhelmed. Then I came upon this book, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Picture here, and this book actually had been presented to me 3 times, and I refused to read it. I don't know why. I was like, I get it, because I'd already been working myself into this and recognized that alchemy was, in fact, the umbrella science which covered everything. Everything. All of your symbolic sciences are covered in it. Everything that generates from any kind of empirical science is generated from alchemy. At its roots, its core, and we'll talk about all that later, but at its baseline foundation, it comes back down to alchemy and Kabbalah. And so I finally just decided, okay, I'll read this book. And it was awesome. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And I realized that in fact, I was looking at myself to a degree. Of course, reading the book subjectively from each character standpoint, you gain a lot more from it. And I'm always choked up at the scene where the boy turns into wind. Stop. Okay, I'll start, get all misty-eyed. And that's one of the benefits, actually. That's one of the benefits of study of alchemy, is that it opens your heart up, because you are now receptive to multiple levels of storytelling all at the same time. It's like listening to whale song, which is multiphonic, right? And of course, we as humans can barely decrypt a few notes out of whale song, but the truth is it's multi-layered phonics. And in our own way, through the use of language and visualism, we have created our own kind of multiphonics, except for it's all this, and you see it and you hear it too, but really it's largely visual, which is appropriate given the current state of consciousness under which we reside, which is ruled by sight. So, all right, so in wrapping this up, because I don't want to just keep dragging on here, but the idea then is, so how did I eventually decide to be an alchemist? Because what else am I going to call myself, really? I've never been comfortable. Alchemy and the study of Kabbalah and the study of these astrotheological archetypes and principles opens your consciousness up to vast storehouses of capacity and ability. Whatever I am able to do, I have earned as a result of study. And so I'm not comfortable saying, like, I'm psychic or whatever. You know, that someone else gets to say that. You know, it's like being born Michael Jordan, and then, you know, other people, they just really work hard all their lives and are just a really good basketball player. You know? So, but ultimately, you know, you do get access to psychism, as Dion Fortune teaches in her book, The Mystic Kabbalah. And that's for real, for sure. Yeah, that's for real. And absolutely, ultimately, when you recognize how expansive our narrative is and how big the universe is, I know it's big. And by that I mean that you're a part of it. Like, just when you recognize, when you can tap into that feeling, yeah, it's big, and you're in it, you're part of it, you're connected viscerally, electrically, all the way, head to toe. It's you and you are it, and you have access to that. It makes you feel alive, and it grants you a greater creativity because you become more receptive. And ultimately, for me, you know, my joy, my zen, is being the guy on the beach who kind of can go, hey, you see all that up there? Let me tell you about it for a second, because that's really cool. That's what I dig. I love it. I love it. That's why I've been teaching this class for free, and will continue to do so at the Druid's Knook, because it's something that it gives me deep satisfaction, largely because I recognize that, and you know, I'm not blind to it. You look at Zen Master Hubba Bubba, I am not blind to what's out there, you know, not in the least bit. I am clearly aware of what's going on. And yet, there are means by which fear of all of that is quelled. And that's something worth sharing to me, and something worth doing. So that's it. And what is the ultimate process of all of that, right? Transmutation. That's it. That is my rubedo. That is my great and final act, right? The final thing that I do is you know, every alchemist is required to do that. As a course of what they do is to go out there and test it and check it, which is why I teach it, because my expectation is that those who learn what I've taught them can then take it someplace higher, use their mighty minds and their great hearts to expand on it and look deeper. I mean, it's just me right now, you know, and a few friends and a couple students here and there. But now we have a class, and there's going to be more because there's you guys out there. And, you know, take this stuff seriously. The things which I'm going to show you are useful in decrypting a great many of the operations of government and the military and catastrophe. And you know, it all has a definite purpose. At least someone thinks so, and that's the point. Is at the very least you need to figure out that it is irrelevant what you think. It's relevant only what they think, and ultimately you have to disregard all of the things which are incidental, right? Just like Lecter advises, he says, that stuff's incidental. What do they do? What are they doing? What do they think they're doing? You know? And usually, if your answer is simple, Occam's razor says you're probably spot on, right? Because the least degree of complication relative to your answer is more likely than not the correct application of logic. So, use your logical mind, stymie your fear, recognize that if anyone is telling you out here to be afraid, they're selling you something, okay? Having a marketing background, I'm telling you right now that if someone's trying to make you afraid, they are selling you something. And that's it. So realize that. And that the people who are trying not to make you afraid are not selling, they're just sharing. Because there's a vast difference. And the difference is that one leads to you remaining static, and the other allows you to go with the flow, and perhaps even direct some of that flow in your benefit. So, that's it. That's what I think anyway. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm going with the class, is to help folks see that. It's going to take a little time because this is a complex process, and you know, we are taught to be so impatient, especially in the United States. We expect that we should be able to become wise and learned in a very short order. We expect that we can watch a couple of YouTube videos and that should be sufficient to help us. The truth is, it's taken me decades to get to this point. Literally decades of continued applied pressure to learning this material from every possible way. From starting off, you know, like pretty much everyone does, you know, with a conservative religious background of some kind. Mine was voluntary because I was pursuing God, and you know, and then a recognition of the fact that in order to grow, you must exceed the boundaries established through a literal interpretation of sacred text. And once you do, once you recognize that no one who actually understands how this material has come to be reads it as anything more than, reads it rather, never reads it literally, rather, that these people are recognizing the deeper value that is encoded with Scripture. And I'm not talking about some weird Bible code that's mathematically in there, whatever. You know, you don't have to be so complicated, you know? That's the thing. Anyone who's trying to overcomplicate some of this stuff, it doesn't have to be. The keys are very simple. The keys are very simple. So, there's one last thing I think I'll talk about here. I was kind of tempted to just conclude, but I'm going to share with you this one clip from Revolver. I'm going to set up for you. It's Guy Ritchie's movie Revolver with Jason Statham. And in this scene, they're playing chess, and a lot can be said about the game of chess. I've had decades of experience with the game. Was introduced to it as a youth. And for myself, the fascination with the game of chess had less to do with the tactics of the game, how to win the game, and more to do with why. Why are certain pieces the way they are? Why is a rook, and a bishop, and a knight, or pawns, and what's happening? What is sociologically taking place? We'll talk about chess some other time. But in this context, recognizing that the game of chess is a sociological representation of the manipulation of various functions within society, both militaristic and civilian and religious, under the aspect of what appears to be a controlled set of rules under a government, that all is actually an illusion. Because behind all of that, behind those two ranks of supposed values and structures, lay the actual players, and they're always out of sight. and they're the ones who are moving the pieces. So you have to understand the game of chess from the perspective of the players as well as the perspective of the pieces. We often just empathize with the pieces, and we think of the game in terms of us being the pieces. And that's purposeful. We've been taught to think of being pieces on the board and never the players on the board. Something like that is an illustration of perspective that is gained through the study of alchemy, through the study of the question, what do they do? And if you are subjectively looking at the nature of the pieces on the board, then what they do is they move because they are moved by someone else. So their movements are controlled, and their movements are restricted based upon the rules of the game and the timing. So that's just briefly what you can learn by studying chess. But there's more, because you understand that chess is a sociological metaphor. If you apply, let's say, what Jason Statham calls the formula, to the idea of chess being a social structure wherein people are being moved and manipulated, then you get a better idea of where the conspiracy analyst comes in relative to all this alchemy, because someone sets the board up. Someone sets up the rules for which all the pieces get to move. All of that was established a long time before the game of chess is even played. And people forget that someone lined the board and decided to exhibit dualism with black and white, and that there's 64 squares, and that those 64 squares I mean, you could just keep going on and on. There's so much depth to the game without ever talking about tactics, without ever talking about any kind of opening move, middle game, or end game. There is so much to talk about chess that makes it interesting, just to look at the board and the game. And that comes from seeing that it's all part of one great whole. Well, in this clip, we get a sense of our own limitation, because as an aspect of the formula, most people assume that the art of the con game, under which all of this is, right? Because if you establish a wide variety of religions and don't necessarily take people all the way, and if your governments are structured in such a way so that people don't really understand that there's an ordered pattern to that structure, and that ordered pattern then will reveal what the players will always do. They will always do certain things because they're fulfilling certain roles relative to the tree and relative to assigned patterns, just like pieces on the board. So if you understand all of that, it'll give you a higher degree of clarity when deconstructing and decrypting the other things that you learn. And this is, again, part of being an alchemist. You have to be a scientist, and you have to be an analyst. You have to be willing to use your mind, and you have to be willing to recognize that a great number of people out there, this is my own revelation of self here, are vastly more intelligent than you are or I am, because they've managed to keep this thing going in such a way so that relatively intelligent people like myself were duped for decades, just totally and unaware that there was a much more beautiful system in place, and that system was being enjoyed privately, and yet expressed publicly, and that all of that was part and parcel to the process. So here's the clip. Enjoy it. I will see you guys this Sunday, and we're going to continue on our discussion on some of the planets. Specifically, we'll start, since we concluded last week with Saturn, we'll start with Saturn and we'll work our way back. And I'm contemplating a little bit of a discussion on embedding of consciousness relative to the means by which time is discussed for us, specifically time in days and weeks and months. So that's one of the things that I'm contemplating us discussing. If there's anything you guys would be interested in hearing about, let me know. And we won't be meeting, this is advance notice, over the Memorial Day weekend, because of course it's the Labor Day weekend, because it's Labor Day weekend. And then we will meet the week following that. So that's it. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Alchemy Journal on the Modern Alchemist channel. Have a great day.
Wake up, Mr. Green.
Checkmate.
How?
Now what?
We've kept you alive, now you can tell me. How do you keep winning?
Very simple. You do all the hard work, I just help you along. The odds is for me to feed pieces to you and make you believe you took those pieces because you're smarter and I'm dumber. In every game and con, there is always an opponent and there is always a victim. The more control the victim thinks he has, the less control he actually has. Gradually, he will hang himself. I, as the opponent, just help him along.
So, is that the treasured formula?
The formula has infinite depth in its efficacy and application, but it is staggeringly simple and completely consistent. Rule 1 of any game or con. You can only get smarter by playing a smarter opponent.
Rule number 2.
The more sophisticated the game, the more sophisticated the opponent.
If the opponent is very good, he will place his victim inside an environment he can control.
Bigger the environment, the easier the control. You toss the dog a bone, find their weakness, give them just a little of what they think they want.
Check.
So the opponent simply distracts their victim by getting them consumed with their own consumption. Check.
The word snake springs to mind.
Don't knock it. You only get smarter by playing a snake. The bigger the trick, and older the trick, the easier it is to pull. Based on 2 principles. They think it can't be that old, and they think it can't be that big for so many people to have fallen for it. Eventually, when the opponent is challenged or questioned, it means the victim's investment and thus his intelligence is questioned. No one can accept that. Not even to themselves. Checkmate.
I ain't playing you again.
You will always find a good opponent in the very last place you would ever look.